The wine critic from San Francisco stood at the bottom of the hill and laughed. Not politely, a full, dismissive bark that echoed off the surrounding slopes. Miss Kowalski, even if you could plant this ridiculous incline, the grapes would be worthless. Wrong elevation, wrong angle, wrong everything. You've thrown your money away. Elena Kowalski, 26 years old, said nothing. She was holding a surveyor's map dated 1887, wrapped in waxed canvas, and a leather notebook that smelled like tobacco and old ink. Her grandfather's handwriting covered every page. She'd heard enough opinions. 10 weeks earlier, the auction in Sonoma County took 4 minutes. Property 128-094-207, 41 acres, July 2nd, 2023, 9:23 a.m. The auctioneer stood under a pop-up tent, voice flat. Hillside parcel, eastern Benchland. Slopes exceed 38 degrees in places. No vehicle access above 200 feet elevation. Prior agricultural use discontinued 1956. Do I hear $6,000? Elena held a cashier's check for $6,400. Everything left after her grandfather died, and his trailer was sold. Around her, 3 men in weathered Carhartt jackets whispered and shook their heads. They knew what she was learning. Land too steep to work stayed worthless. $6,000, she said. Silence. The auctioneer's gavel fell like a period at the end of a sentence nobody wanted to finish. She signed the deed in the county building's basement. The clerk, a thin woman with reading glasses on a chain, slid the documents across a table scarred with decades of signatures. You're aware there's no road access past the lower third? I am. Your grandfather Anthony tried to buy this land in 1998. Bank wouldn't finance it. Too steep. The clerk's voice softened. He was a good man. Worked the Benziger estate before his hands gave out. Elena nodded. She'd been 9 when Grandpa Anthony's arthritis ended his vineyard work. 40 years of pruning and trellising, training vines by hand. He'd worked retail after that. Saved everything. Written every night in his notebook under the lamp in his kitchen. He'd left her 2 things. The $6,400 and a metal box with a combination scratched on the bottom. 1887. Inside, the notebook, the surveyor's map, and a letter on thin paper, his cramped European script. The hill is not a problem. It is the answer. What they abandoned because machines could not reach it. You will work as our people did before machines existed. The steepness they fear creates the drainage and sun exposure that makes great wine. Read pages 31 to 39. Do not waste words on doubters. Let the vines prove it. She drove to the property that afternoon in her grandfather's 1994 Ford Ranger, which needed brake work and had 198,000 miles. The land rose sharply from the county road, a wall of wild grass, poison oak, and scattered oaks. The lower section, maybe 10 acres, had been planted once. Rotted posts still stood in crooked rows. Wire rusted to nothing. Above that, the hill climbed steep and relentless. She tried driving up. At 230 feet elevation, the truck's wheels spun uselessly. She got out and climbed on foot. 38 degrees in places. Her thighs burned. Loose rocks slid under her boots. But at the top, breathing hard, she turned and looked down at the valley spreading west toward the coast. Perfect southern exposure. Constant airflow. The soil, where she scraped away grass, was thin and rocky. Terrible for conventional farming. Exactly what wine grapes needed for stress and concentration. That night, camped in the truck bed, she opened the notebook to pages 31 to 39 by flashlight. Her grandfather's notes were copied from older sources, techniques from Portugal's Douro Valley, where steep terraced vineyards had produced port wine for 3 centuries without machinery. Hand-built stone terraces, vines planted in shallow dug holes. Everything carried up by human labor. Traditional methods that modern California vineyards had abandoned when tractors arrived. Below the notes, calculations. Vine spacing for steep slopes, terracing. Angles, cost projections. And a list of grape varieties, not Cabernet or Chardonnay, the valley standards, but old Portuguese varieties adapted to poor soil and harsh conditions. Touriga Nacional, Tinta Roriz, Saseo. The next morning, she walked every inch of the hill with the 1887 map. The surveyor had marked something her grandfather had circled heavily. Franciscan plantings, 1843 to 1856, abandoned. The Mission Padres had planted wine grapes here before California was a state, before anyone owned tractors. She found the evidence at the hill's eastern edge, a single ancient vine, thick as her thigh, half dead but alive. She took cuttings carefully, wrapped them in damp cloth. The neighboring vineyard's owner arrived on the fourth day. Marcus Chun, mid-50s, drove a clean white pickup with Chun Family Wines on the door. "You're the one who bought the vertical land?" "Yes, sir." He walked to where the slope began its serious climb, looked up, looked back at her. "What are you planting?" "Wine grapes. Terraced by hand." His face went carefully neutral. "Miss, what's your name?" "Elena Kowalski." "Miss Kowalski, modern viticulture requires machinery. Tractors, sprayers, harvesters. You can't access 2/3 of this property with equipment. Even if you planted it, you couldn't maintain it commercially. My grandfather managed vines by hand for 40 years. On flat land with tractor rows." Shen's voice wasn't unkind, but it was final. "This won't work. The economics don't pencil." "I'm sorry." After he left, Elena kept walking the property, planning terrace lines with string and a level her grandfather had left in the toolbox. She had $640 left after the land purchase. No tractor, no equipment, just knowledge written in a dead man's notebook and a hill everyone said was worthless. She started digging the first terrace on July 15th. The stone for the terraces came from the hill itself. Elena worked 12-hour days, sometimes 14, prying rocks from the slope with a digging bar, rolling them into position, building low retaining walls following the contour lines she'd marked with stakes and string. Each terrace was 3 feet wide, just enough for a single row of vines. The grade dropped 8 inches per terrace level. Her hands blistered, calloused, split, calloused again. Her shoulders became iron. She lost 15 pounds in the first month. The neighbors came to watch like she was street theater. Shen returned with his vineyard manager, a woman named Paula. They stood at the base of the hill while Elena wrestled a 50-pound stone into position 30 feet above them. "How many terraces are you planning?" Paula called up. 43. Elena said, not stopping. Paula and Shen exchanged a look. "That's insane," Paula said, not quite under her breath. But Chun was staring at the 3 completed terraces, the precision of the stonework, the careful grading. "Who taught you dry stone construction?" "My grandfather's notebook. He copied it from Portuguese vineyard workers. Even if you build them, you can't plant a commercial vineyard by hand. The labor costs alone." "On the labor," Elena said. She finished the next stone and straightened, looking down at them. "In the Douro Valley, they've been doing this for 500 years. They carry everything up on their backs. Cuttings, tools, harvest baskets. The wines sell for $100 a bottle." Chen's expression shifted slightly. "You're planning high-end, low volume?" "Very high-end. Very low volume." After they left, she kept building. The heat was merciless. August in Sonoma, dry and white. She rationed water, worked dawn to noon, rested in shade, worked again until dark. By September 1st, she had 19 terraces completed. Her money was gone. She was living on rice and beans, showering at the county park, sleeping in the truck. The real mockery came September 8th, at the Growers Association meeting. Elena went because they were discussing water allocations. She sat in back, soil still under her fingernails, and said nothing. Until Marcus Chin mentioned her project. For those who don't know, someone bought the old Franciscan hill on Leveroni Road. She's tried to terrace it by hand for wine grapes. The room, 23 growers, mostly men, mostly third generation, went quiet, then murmured with amusement. Someone laughed. A man named Bill Hendricks, who ran 200 acres of Cabernet, turned in his seat. "You're the hell girl? What are you even planting up there?" "Portuguese varieties. Tarriga, Tinta Roriz, Saseo." The room erupted. Real laughter this time. "Nobody in Sonoma grows Portuguese grapes," Hendricks said. "There's no market. You're wasting your time on weird varieties nobody wants, on land nobody can work, using methods from the 19th century. Elena's face stayed expressionless. Her grandfather's voice in her head, "Do not waste words on doubters." "Noted," she said quietly. But a woman near the front, older, turned around. "Margaret Russo, who ran a small organic vineyard. I remember your grandfather. Antoni Kowalski. He knew vines better than anyone I ever met." "Thank you," Elena said. Russo looked at Hendricks. "Maybe let her fail before you celebrate it, Bill." The meeting moved on. Elena left before it ended. That night, sitting on the tailgate in the dark, she faced the numbers. She had 19 terraces. She needed 43. Each terrace required roughly 2 tons of stone to build and another week of labor. At her current pace, she'd finish construction in March, barely in time for spring planting. But she had no money for vines. The cuttings from the ancient Franciscan vine had rooted. She'd been nursing them in salvaged pots. But she had maybe 20 viable plants. She needed 300. The next morning, she swallowed her pride and called the university extension. A viticulturist named Dr. Sarah Kim answered. I'm looking for Portuguese grape cuttings. To Riga Nacional specifically. For Sonoma? That's unusual. What's your site? Elena described the property, the slope, the elevation, the soil composition, the sun exposure. Kim was quiet for a long moment. Send me your exact coordinates. And photos of the soil and the terraces you've built. Elena sent them that afternoon. Kim called back 3 hours later. Your site is extraordinary. That slope, that exposure. If you can actually farm it, the grapes would be remarkable. The stress from thin soil and the elevation could produce incredible concentration. Can you help me source cuttings? Better. I have a colleague at UC Davis who maintains a Portuguese variety collection. I think I can get you scion wood. You'd have to graft it yourself onto rootstock. I can do that. It's not easy. I watched my grandfather do it 1,000 times. Kim paused. Why are you doing this? You could work for an established vineyard, learn the business, maybe buy conventional land eventually. Elena looked up at the hill, the terraces she'd built with her own hands, the stone walls catching late sun. Because this is the land my grandfather dreamed of. And because everyone says it's impossible. She finished the 43rd terrace on March 3, 2024, 8 months after the auction. Her hands were scarred, her body was lean and hard, and she had 312 vines ready to plant. Grafted cuttings, each one placed in the ground by hand, watered with buckets carried up from the truck. The day she finished planting, it rained for the first time in months. She sat on the highest terrace, mud-covered and exhausted, and watched water run down the hill in controlled channels between the stone walls, exactly as her grandfather's drawings had predicted. The vines took. By May, green shoots pushed from every plant. And Marcus Chin came back one more time. But now he wasn't alone. He brought a man in expensive casual clothes, Italian shoes already dusty. Elena, this is Thomas Wright, wine critic for the Chronicle. Wright was the one who laughed. Elena stood on the 7th terrace, 40 feet up the hill, and watched the wine critic's amusement fade as he really looked at what she'd built. Thomas Wright stopped laughing. He pulled reading glasses from his pocket, studied the stone walls, the precisely graded levels, the young vines growing in perfect rows along the contour lines. Who did the construction? I did, Elena said. By yourself. He looked genuinely shocked. Yes. Wright climbed up slowly, breathing hard by the 3rd terrace. When he reached Elena, he crouched and examined the soil, rubbed it between his fingers, stood and looked at the vine spacing, the trellis post she'd sunk by hand. These varieties, Touriga, Tinta Roriz. You're making port, table wine, but using grapes bred for poor soil and steep slopes. In Sonoma. He said it like the words didn't fit together. Marcus Chun had climbed up behind him. Tom, look at the exposure. Look at the drainage. This is a phenomenal site. If she can actually bring in a harvest, Wright said, hand carrying everything up and down this incline, the labor cost would be astronomical. On the labor, Elena said again. Wright turned to face her fully. Miss Kowalski, even if, and this is a substantial if, even if you produce grapes, you'd need a winery to process them. Crush, fermentation, barrel aging, bottling. That's capital. Real money. Elena had been thinking about this for months. Custom crush facilities rent tank space and equipment by the ton. I'll have maybe 1 ton my first harvest, 2 tons the year after. I've already talked to Westside Custom Crush. They'll take me. And your first vintage won't be sellable for 3 years minimum. How do you eat until then? I work. She'd already lined up pruning jobs at 3 vineyards. Winter work, cash under the table. Same as my grandfather did. Wright studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a phone and took photos. The terraces, the vines, the valley view below. I'm not writing about this yet. But if you bring in a harvest and the fruit quality is there, I want to know. After they left, Elena went back to work. The vines needed training. shoots tied to wires, laterals managed. Every plant received individual attention because there was no other way to do it. No tractor-pulled sprayers. No mechanical hedgers. Just her, every day, walking the terraces. The heat that summer was brutal, 2024's drought extending into its third year. Around the valley, established vineyards struggled. Irrigation districts cut allocations. Wells ran dry. Bill Hendricks lost 30 acres of Cabernet to water stress. But Elena's hill thrived. The terraces created microclimates, each level slightly different, catching or shedding heat. The thin rocky soil forced roots deep. The constant airflow prevented mildew and rot. The vines were stressed but healthy, producing small, concentrated clusters. Margaret Russo visited in August, hiking up the terraces with a walking stick. She examined the fruit, tasted a berry, looked at Elena with new eyes. This is going to be good. Really good. It's too early to know. I've been growing grapes for 37 years. I know. Russo pulled out a business card. When you make wine, call me. I have buyer contacts you'll need. Harvest came September 19th. Elena picked every cluster by hand, carried them down in 30-pound bins, made 6 trips. Total yield, 1.4 tons. Small by commercial standards. Perfect for what she needed. Westside Custom Crush took her fruit. The winemaker, a quiet man named David, crushed and fermented it while Elena watched. The sugar content is remarkable, 26 bricks. And the acid balance, where did you say this came from? Steep hillside, hand-farmed. David tasted the fermenting juice, his expression shifting. This is serious fruit. The wine aged in neutral oak barrels. She couldn't afford new French oak, so she used older barrels that wouldn't impart heavy flavors. Every month, she drove to the facility, tasted from the barrel, watched the wine develop. In March 2025, David called her. Elena, you need to come taste this. The wine was dark, almost opaque. The nose was intense, black fruit, stone, herbs, something mineral and complex. She tasted it, felt it coat her mouth, the tannins firm but refined, the finish lasting 30 seconds. This, David said quietly, is extraordinary. I've made wine in this valley for 20 years. This is special. It's ready to bottle? Not yet. Give it another year and barrel. But yes, it's going to be ready. She bottled in June 2026. 280 cases. She designed the label herself. Simple, elegant, just the words Kowalski Vineyard, Touriga Nacional, Sonoma Coast, and the year. The back label told the story in 3 sentences. Hand-terraced hillside. Dry-farmed. 41 cases produced. Margaret Russo made calls. Thomas Wright, who'd stayed loosely in touch, came to taste the bottled wine in August. He sat in the West Side facility's tasting room, poured 2 ounces into a glass, swirled, smelled, tasted. Set the glass down. Taste it again. What are you asking for this? $85 a bottle. It's worth twice that. He looked at her. I want to write about this. The full story. The hill, the terraces, your grandfather, everything. The article ran September 2026 in the Chronicle Sunday edition. The vineyard, everyone said, was impossible. It went viral. By Monday, Elena's email, a free Gmail account she'd set up, had 200 inquiries. By Friday, all 280 cases were sold. Mostly to restaurants, some to collectors, several to the growers who'd laughed at her 2 years earlier. Bill Hendricks called personally. I was wrong. I'd like to buy a case if you have any left. I don't, Elena said. But I'll put you on the list for next vintage. The money from that first sale, $23,000. Enough to pay off the custom crush bill, buy new vine cuttings, start expanding to the hill's western slope. Marcus Chin offered to buy her out for $300,000. She declined. Thomas Wright wrote a follow-up piece. Wine Spectator called. Then Food and Wine. But the moment that mattered most came in November, when Margaret Russo drove up and climbed the terraces with her. They stood at the top, looking down at 43 levels of perfect stone walls, green vines going dormant for winter, the valley spreading west. Your grandfather would be proud, Russo said. Elena had brought the notebook, carried it in her work jacket. She opened it to the last page Antony had written, dated 3 days before his stroke. The best vines grow where they must struggle. The best wine comes from what others overlook. You will show them, Mojanukska. You will prove that the old ways still make the finest things. Elena closed the notebook and looked at her vineyard, The hill no tractor could climb, the land everyone called worthless, now producing wine that critics called transcendent. She'd started with $6,400 and a dead man's knowledge. She'd built it with stone and stubbornness, terraces and time. And the hill, which everyone said was impossible, had become exactly what her grandfather promised. Proof that the hardest climbs yield the richest rewards.